Ramzan Kadyrov and his son Adam, who is often called the next leader of Chechnya, were urgently flown by plane to hospitals in Moscow. This was reported by Russian media and Telegram channels. Kadyrov Sr. was reportedly taken to the hospital due to another deterioration in his health, while the motorcade of his son Adam was involved in a serious car accident, as a result of which Kadyrov's most prominent son sustained severe injuries. Politico reports that news of Kadyrov Sr.'s failing health surfaced during a vulnerable time for the Kremlin. Alexander Mozhetchuk investigates why.
Ramzan Kadyrov has ruled Chechnya with absolute power longer than any other regional official in Russia. For him, the Russian budget became something like an unlimited credit card to fulfill his own whims. His ostentatious luxury looks excessive even by the shameless standards of Russia's corrupt bureaucracy. On his way to the top, Kadyrov filled an entire graveyard with those who crossed him, and he has never been held accountable for any of his crimes. A new Politico publication emphasizes that Kadyrov is known for a combination of ruthless repression and fake bravado on social media. And yet another news story about him being ready to die emerged at a moment of vulnerability for the Kremlin.
At the end of December, the Russian outlet Novaya Gazeta Europe reported that Kadyrov was urgently hospitalized during a trip to Moscow. Citing Ukrainian military intelligence, Ukrainian media reported last week that Kadyrov is being treated at a private clinic in Grozny for kidney failure.
Politico writes that when he came to power in the late 90s, the Russian dictator promised to wipe out the so-called Chechen terrorists. They note that the subsequent military campaign, known as the Second Chechen War, turned the little-known KGB officer Putin into a public figure, which secured his victory in his first presidential election.
Chechnya became a testing ground for Putin's first use of military force to eliminate opponents and install a loyal representative. Putin's brutality in Ukraine, which includes Moscow's bombing of civilian targets and the torture of prisoners of war under the pretext of a military operation, is in many ways reminiscent of the early Chechen campaign.
Kadyrov became the de facto ruler of Chechnya at the age of 28, almost immediately after his father was assassinated. Politico notes that Ramzan inherited a deal with the Kremlin, power in exchange for total loyalty to Putin.
Kadyrov's rule is based on a deeply personal pact with the Kremlin, which operates outside official legislation and oversight. What happens after him will be a test for this arrangement, at a time of unusual tension for Moscow. In December of last year, responding to journalists' questions, Kadyrov stated that he suffers from nervous breakdowns, which he links to his so-called concern for Chechen fighters fighting in Ukraine. At that time, he also confirmed his intention to run again in the elections in September 2026.
Kadyrov's favorite and most decorated younger son, Adam, is now 18. He came of age at the end of last year. Despite his young age, he has dozens of awards for all sorts of so-called achievements. He's the secretary of the Chechen Security Council, oversees the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Republic and the Putin Special Forces University. However, it's not certain that he will be able to hold on to power in Chechnya as successfully in the event of his father's sudden death as Ramzan once did. After all, to do that, he still has to survive the recent car accident. The publication Kafkaz really writes that Adam was driving the car that was leading the motorcade, and at very high speed, it suddenly encountered some kind of obstacle.
As a result, the cars started crashing into each other. That's why there are reports that quite a few people were injured.
The media reports that Adam, along with his father, was urgently transported by plane to hospitals in Moscow, where just a few weeks ago, Kadyrov Sr. had barely been revived at the Central Clinical Hospital of the Administrative Directorate of the President of Russia. The press reported that his kidneys had failed and a quiet clan struggle for power was already unfolding in Chechnya. And if another clan comes to power instead of the Kadyrovs, there are no guarantees that they will be as loyal to the Kremlin as the Kadyrovs were. Alexander Mozhetchuk, Podrobitsi, Intermarathon TV channel.
The Kremlin has decided to give Ramzan Kadyrov a shocking gift. This concerns a Ukrainian city that Russia effectively wants to hand over to Chechen formations for control, Akhmat. Such plans could have far-reaching consequences for the fate of the temporarily occupied territories and create a new front of threats for Ukraine. More information in our report. My name is Yevhen Sirov. This is the Glavred channel. Subscribe and give us a like. Let's get started. According to Ukrainian partisan movements, particularly the Atesh movement, the Kremlin is reportedly preparing to transfer the temporarily occupied Mariupol and the surrounding region under the full control of Chechen formations connected to Ramzan Kadyrov, particularly the Akhmat battalion. This information was reported in the statements of partisans who operated in the region. Mariupol is viewed not as a political reward, but as a resource base with significant industrial potential, which they also want to set aside for Chechnya's complete monopoly. According to the partisan movement, additional Akhmat units will soon appear in the city to finally secure control over local resources and to strengthen Grozny's influence in the temporarily occupied territories. According to members of the underground, this move has two main objectives. First, to secure the loyalty of Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov to the Kremlin. And secondly, to effectively transfer part of Ukrainian territory under the control of irregular but pro-Russian forces. Kadyrov himself has traditionally been closely connected to Russian President Vladimir Putin as a politician and commander who is largely dependent on Moscow's support. According to Atesh, Chechens are already actively moving through the streets of Mariupol, driving expensive SUVs and displaying a sense of complete impunity and the status of new masters of the region. This is causing concern among local residents, who are noting their presence without license plates or with forged documents. Importantly, the position of the partisans is that Russia may give up Mariupol, not for stabilization, but for further economic exploitation and to strengthen the influence of pro-Russian forces. According to them, there will be no serious guarantees of security or rights for local residents, and the city is viewed solely as a source of industrial and material resources. These reports are emerging against the backdrop of the Kremlin's broader attempts to strengthen control over the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, not only through military presence, but also through administrative and social changes, which include transferring authority or control over key areas to cities allied with Moscow. Experts also note that such actions have consequences not only for Mariupol itself, but for the entire situation. In southern Ukraine, the city has always had important strategic, economic, and symbolic significance, and its transfer under the control of the Akhmat formations could become another step in attempts to consolidate the pro-Russian administration in the occupied territories. On the other hand, such steps may also indicate certain internal calculations by the Kremlin regarding control over the Chechen leader and his battalions, which Moscow uses as one of the tools of influence within its own military coalition. It is important to add that such reports are coming in from partisan and underground sources, and official Russian structures do not confirm them on open propaganda channels. However, the fact of additional Akhmat units being moved into the Mariupol area is already being recorded by independent observers as one of the alarming signals. Changes in the security situation in the region. Thus, in Mariupol, not just a strengthening of the military presence is possible, but an actual transfer of control over the city to the Kremlin's allies in exchange for political loyalty and influence within the broader context of the Russian coalition.